Welcome, drifters. Tonight, we journey to the edge of the world, where one figure stands beneath the stars bearing the sky itself. This is the story of Atlas, the Titan who holds up the heavens. Let the weight of the world fade as his legend unfolds. If this story helps you drift into rest, leave a like and subscribe. Your support helps keep these timeless tales alive night after night. Atlas was the powerful Titan who stood between earth and sky, a figure of immense strength and endurance who carried the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders for eternity. Once, he had been a mighty leader among the Titans during their great war against the new gods, and in that ancient struggle he had defied Zeus himself, standing tall with his brothers against the Thunder Wielder. But when the Titans fell, and the new order of Olympus was established, Atlas was not destroyed or cast into oblivion like others. His punishment was different. Instead of imprisonment in the abyss or erasure from the world, he was condemned to hold up the sky, separating it forever from the earth, his back bowed under the ceaseless weight of the heavens. Some said he was placed as guardian of the cosmic pillars that kept the sky and earth apart, his hands resting on their eternal shafts, never allowed to release his grip. Others imagined him alone in a distant corner of the world, shoulders pressed against the star-filled dome, his breath heavy and his gaze fixed on the endless arc of celestial motion. Despite his fall from power, Atlas remained a figure of great knowledge, especially in the mysteries of the skies. He was the first to teach humanity how to read the stars, how to navigate the oceans by their patterns, and how to count the seasons by their cycles. Farmers looked to him for guidance in marking the times of planting and harvest, and sailors looked skyward, calling on his wisdom as they charted their courses. In time, the myth grew, and people believed that it was Atlas who turned the heavens themselves, causing the stars to move in their nightly dance, his strength spinning the firmament like a great wheel across the dark. One day, during a quest that led him to the ends of the earth, a hero came upon the weary Titan. The hero, searching for the golden apples guarded by the daughters of night, found Atlas standing beneath the sky. The Titan offered to retrieve the apples himself if the hero would take the heavens for a while. Lifting the burden from his back for the first time in ages, the hero agreed, and with a groan, the Titan straightened, free at last, even if only for a moment. During this time, the hero also slew the dragon that guarded the sacred grove, a creature that some said had tormented Atlas as he bore the sky, its coiled form wrapped around his feet in ancient vase paintings. After bringing the apples, Atlas considered leaving the hero beneath the sky and walking away, but he was tricked, and the heavens returned once again to his shoulders. To ease the burden, the hero raised two immense pillars at the edges of the world, structures so vast they could help carry the sky itself, relieving some of the weight Atlas had endured for generations. Still, the Titan remained in place, silent and strong, holding firm the balance of the cosmos. In the passing of many ages, another traveler came, one who carried the severed head of a monstrous being, whose gaze could turn all living things to stone. When this new hero passed by the Titan's resting place, he found Atlas once again upright beneath the sky. But the Titan, hardened by years of torment and filled with suspicion or anger, challenged the stranger. And so, the hero lifted the dreadful head and revealed it, and the Titan's body stiffened, the flesh turning to stone. His limbs became ridges, his back became slopes, and his hair became peaks, until all that remained was a vast and jagged mountain, cold and unyielding. This stony form remained forever gazing skyward, a final monument to the one who had borne the heavens. Even then, his legacy was not lost. for in the stars themselves his image appeared again. Among the constellations was one who knelt, as if straining under a great weight, and this figure too was named for Atlas, eternal in both earth and sky. In the oldest texts, the story of Atlas shifts and twists like the stars he once guided. He was the son of Titans, some said of Iapetus and Clymene, others of Aether and Gaia, and his brothers were famed as well, from the foresightful to the foolish. In one version, he knew the depths of every sea and stood beside the farthest oceans, supporting the columns that kept the sky from collapsing upon the world. These columns were imagined by some to be in the center of the earth, keeping the heavens high above, while others saw them at the edge of all things, forming a ring that held up the dome of the sky like a massive celestial bowl. The ancient poets and philosophers debated these meanings, wondering whether Atlas held up the sky itself or stood as a personified mountain supporting the world's limits. In Homer's verses, he was both divine and elemental, a being of immense understanding whose role in the order of the cosmos could not be removed. The poets who followed added their own views, some painting him in chains, others as a wise teacher of mankind, some merging him with the mountains themselves, and some lifting his likeness into the stars. As time passed, this blending of person and place, of god and geography, of myth and map, became complete. The name of Atlas lived on not just in tales, but in the charts and globes that bore his likeness, the heavens he once held now studied by those he had once taught. His story became a symbol of endurance, not just in physical strength, but in knowledge passed through generations, in the resilience of those who bear great burdens, and in the cosmic stillness of one who stands between sky and earth for all time. Atlas, whose story stretched across the old myths and blended with many others, was firmly placed as the leader of the Titans during their great struggle against Zeus and the Olympians. And when the Titans fell, his punishment was unique among them. He was forced to carry the weight of heaven upon his head and hands, a task that would never end. This vision of a being holding the sky aloft became one of the most enduring images in all ancient tales, shaped first by the early poets and later twisted and reimagined in different ways. The poet Hesiod kept the idea simple and clear. Atlas was a son of Iapetus and Clymene, and when the old order collapsed under the thunder of Zeus, Atlas was singled out to bear the dome of heaven forever, not as a metaphor, but as an eternal labor of punishment and separation between sky and earth. Hyginus echoed this, placing Atlas among the conquered, a titan who had stood tall only to fall and then to stand again, this time beneath the weight of the sky. But later traditions, as they often did, began to shift the story, layering new meanings and explanations on top of the old, offering rational versions that made the myth into something else entirely. Some said Atlas was not truly a titan, but a man, one of immense size and knowledge, who through some great encounter was turned into a mountain. In one famous version, told by the poet Ovid, it was the hero with the head of Medusa who approached Atlas asking for shelter, and when the request was denied, revealed the Gorgon's face, freezing Atlas into stone, making him into a massive mountain on which the heavens now rested with all their stars. The myth had turned from divine punishment to magical transformation. Others took a different route, saying Atlas had been a wise and powerful king, not a fallen titan, and that his knowledge of the heavens was so advanced, he was the first to understand that the sky was a sphere and that the stars moved in cycles. They said the image of the sky resting on his shoulders was only symbolic, a way to express his role in shaping the early study of astronomy and celestial movement. And yet, despite these changes, the central image of Atlas bearing the heavens continued. It remained fixed in sculpture, painting, and story, where he stood bowed beneath the weight of the stars, still enduring. As maps of the world expanded and geographical understanding grew, the idea of Atlas being a single mountain at the edge of the earth also evolved. Once it had been one mountain at the edge of the world, distant and unreachable, but in time the name Atlas was given to different places, as people named ranges and regions after the mythical bearer. There came to be an Atlas in Mauritania, one in Italy, another in Arcadia, even one in the distant Caucasus. But the most common belief, the one that lasted through the generations, was that the true heaven-bearing Atlas stood in the northwestern part of Africa, and it was in that corner of the world that a great range of mountains took his name and still hold it to this day. Even as his story shifted, Atlas remained woven into other tales, not just as a figure of strength, but as a father. He was said to have fathered the Pleiades, those bright daughters in the sky, by either Pleione or Hesperis. He was also linked to the Hyades and the golden Hesperides through Aethra, and even to Oenomaus and Maia through Steropet. Some called Dione and Calypso his children too, as well as Hyas and Hesperus, expanding his lineage across the heavens and the myths alike. These offspring tied him to many different stories, spreading his presence not only across the sky, but into the very roots of Greek myth. Artists and poets kept his image alive as well. The painter Panenus depicted him on the parapet near the great statue of Zeus at Olympia, his burden eternal. On the ancient chest of Cypselus, he was carved carrying the heavens, but also holding the golden apples from the garden of his daughters, showing both his punishment and the beauty tied to it. On the throne of Apollo in Amyclae, he was shown again, a figure never forgotten, fixed in a moment of suffering and strength. The name Telamon, meaning the bearer, became another title for him, emphasizing his role as the one who suffered under the sky. The poet Hesiod, when listing the line of the Titans, placed Atlas among the strong-hearted sons of Iapetus, born from Clymene, the daughter of the ocean. He stood alongside brothers who were also powerful, each given traits that shaped the world, one proud and doomed, another clever and defiant, but it was Atlas who would bear the longest burden. And as myths continued to evolve, he remained at the edge of everything, half man, half mountain, half god, half idea, forever between heaven and earth, frozen in time and in stone, but always turning in the minds of those who looked to the stars and wondered who held them in place. Atlas, born of the line of Titans, stood as one of the towering sons of Iapetus and Clymene, or sometimes named Asia, according to ancient sources that preserve fragments of his myth through the centuries. He was brother to Prometheus, known for his cleverness, Epimetheus, whose mind wandered aimlessly, and Menoetius, whose arrogance led to ruin. All were born from the ancient blood of the primal generations, descendants of sky and earth, shaped before the rise of the Olympians. In some older versions, it was said that Atlas came not from Iapetus and Clymene, but from the union of ether and terra, or from the heavens and earth directly, his lineage confused in later retellings but always tied to the vast powers of the cosmos. Alongside his fellow Titans, names like Hyperion, Coeus, Cronus, Rhea, and others, Atlas played a part in the great rebellion against the rule of Zeus, when the Titans sought to restore the throne to their own, hoping to dethrone the new gods and raise Kronos once again. spurred on by resentment and loss, encouraged by tales of betrayal and promises of power, the Titans climbed toward the sky, seeking to break the heavens with force, but Zeus, aided by others like Athena, Apollo, and Artemis, met them in battle and struck them down. The war ended with the Titans cast deep into Tartarus, imprisoned beneath the earth in a place of endless night and roaring chains. But for Atlas, the punishment was different. He had led the charge, carried the weight of their hopes and fury, and so his fate was to carry something heavier still. Zeus assigned to him a burden that would never end. The vault of the sky itself, resting upon his shoulders and arms, pressed endlessly against the strength of his back and neck. He would not be imprisoned in the pit, but instead would stand forever at the edge of the world, where the heavens meet the earth and sea, holding the sky aloft in ceaseless toil. In Homer's account, he was called Baleful Atlas, knowing the deepest parts of the ocean, and guarding, or upholding, the great pillars that separated sky from land, standing between the realms like a living boundary. In Hesiod's words, Atlas held up the wide heaven with his head and arms, stationed before the Hesperides, the daughters of the west, where the world's borders stretched thin and the voices of the horizon could still be heard. He did not rest or falter, his limbs unwearying even as the weight pressed upon him with every passing moment. Far beyond the places known to mortals, near the springs of earth and sea and the underworld itself, there stood the home of night, cloaked in black clouds, and there Atlas remained. He watched as night and day passed by him, each brushing past the great gates of bronze, never stopping, never turning, while he remained unmoving. He was not part of their cycle, but bound to the task that Zeus had set for him, to forever keep sky and earth apart with no relief. Pindar remembered him as still laboring, straining under the burden, exiled far from his homeland, far from any joy or inheritance, his past taken and his future sealed. Though the Titans had been freed in myth as time passed and gentler winds came, still Atlas remained beneath his burden, his punishment not forgotten nor lifted, because the balance of the heavens depended on him. He was not only a figure of strength, but of endurance, of silence beneath weight, of the eternal separation between what is above and what is below. In artistic fragments and lost verses, others spoke of him too. In Simonides' Lost Lines, found quoted later, Atlas again appeared as the eternal bearer, a symbol of ceaseless struggle, his body the bridge between forces too great to meet. Over time, his story was remembered in many forms, but this one remained constant, the son of the ancient Titans, who once rose in rebellion, now made to hold the sky on his shoulders forever, standing where the horizon ends, with no voice, no sleep, and no escape, as the stars turned overhead and the cycles of gods and men continued far away from where he stood, fixed forever beneath the dome of the heavens. He was seen across the world and across the ages as the one who held the sky on his shoulders, and no matter how far stories wandered, they returned again and again to the image of Atlas, the Titan who bore the weight of heaven upon his back. In the words of the old tragedians, the poets, and the mythographers, his burden remained unchanged, timeless and heavy, pressing down without end. One brother spoke with sorrow of his fate, watching from afar as he stood toward the west, straining beneath the pillar that held apart the sky and the earth, a pillar that was no structure of stone or wood, but a force that his arms must endlessly grasp. The lament was deep, carried in the voice of Prometheus, who, even in his own suffering, remembered the hardship of his brother, bearing the dome of the heavens alone. Another voice, that of a visitor and witness, spoke of how the whole earth cried in mourning, not only for the suffering of one, but for the lost honor that had once belonged to them both, an honor born in the age before the fall. That same voice remembered one other who had been trapped before, bound not in chains, but in duty. Atlas, whose strength had been known far and wide, now bent low as he groaned under the sky's vast weight. The world above and the world below both trembled at what he held. His daughters, named by the stars as the seven sisters, the Pleiades, often wept as they looked down upon their father, for they knew the labor that defined him, and they were helpless to lift even a moment of it. They saw him not only as their sire, but as a figure locked in an eternal moment of strain, a figure greater than any mountain, yet as immovable. His place of suffering was spoken of as a dwelling of silence and desolation, far away, across the lands of Libya, where few dared travel, and where the sky seemed to lean lower than anywhere else. Even when the mighty struck against the heavens, when storms shook the sea, when thunder rolled through the heights, there were moments when the knees of Atlas trembled, when the very weight he bore threatened to fall, yet he did not collapse. His body held through all storms, even as the world itself seemed to reel beneath him. His duty had been set by the hand of Zeus, and though ages passed, it did not change. In times of fire and fury, even as the chariot of the sun scorched the sky and scorched the ground, even as the blaze consumed the edges of the earth, Atlas faltered under the burning dome but did not fall. His shoulders barely held the flaming sky, but still he stood. Time and again the poets recalled him, the great giant with shoulders wide enough to bear the circling dome above all things. Even in moments when others took the sky for a while, such as when Heracles bent his neck to carry the weight for just a short time, it was still Atlas to whom the sky was returned, for none else was fated to bear it forever. His name echoed through epics, elegies, and stories carved into stone. Some saw him standing with arms beneath the stars, supporting the very frame of the universe. He was not simply part of a tale, but a vision of unending strength, a silent guardian placed at the edge of the world. One poet told of seeing him within the waves themselves, iron-bound, as if frozen in time, standing in the great ocean, while the waters swelled and crashed around his knees. Above him, the sun rushed past with its chariot of fire, and he remained still beneath it all. His presence marked boundaries, and where the sea met the sky, where the edge of the earth gave way to clouds, there Atlas stood. In depictions upon palace walls, carved in iron or painted in dyes of red and gold, he was shown in the deep, his body beneath the rising tide, yet his shoulders holding steady as the heavens turned. His form was used to describe the land itself, the sunset mountains, the places where day ended and the stars began, where Atlas's shadow stretched long and unmoving. His was not a glory sought, nor a power envied, but a sentence carried out with no voice, no rest, and no reward. Each telling of his story returned to the same truth, that he held the sky not once, not briefly, but always. His back bowed under the weight that separated stars from soil, his arms pressed upward while his legs stood rooted deep in myth and rock alike. Through storms and silence, in flame or in cold, he remained. The light of dawn and the dark of night passed across his shoulders in equal measure, and yet he did not change. No chains bound him, yet he could not walk away. No sword pierced him, yet he could not be freed. He bore the sky itself, not just its weight, but its turning, its stars, its boundaries. He bore the separation of heaven and earth. He bore the edge of the world. He bore eternity. Man's body stands small beneath the immense curve of the sky, and above, In that dome of celestial movement, the sun leads the way with its blazing wheel, casting golden light across the heavens as it moves across the arc of day. Behind it, not far in its journey, follows the pale glow of the moon, her wheel smaller and gentler, trailing the path already warmed by the sun's blaze. Around them swirl the distant fires of the Pleiades, their light clustered and cold, and nearby shine the Hyades, whose hair glistens with the dew of rain, their presence always a sign of wet skies. Yet beyond all these moving lights, at the edge of the world, stood Atlas, a figure greater than any star, older than any tale. He whose shoulders bore not just the sky's weight, but its ceaseless turning, shuddered beneath it. His massive frame trembled as the dome of the heavens pressed down, and his muscles shifted beneath the unbearable burden. Even the earth, solid and immense, offered no help, for she herself rested without effort, while Atlas, her son through blood and fate, struggled beneath the endless stars. The weight he carried was not a still one. It spun, it moved, it circled. The entire firmament turned, and with every moment it tugged and twisted, forcing his body to adjust, his strength to endure, never resting. His labor was not only one of weight, but of motion, for the sky did not sit idle. It rolled above him, a seven-zoned vault mapped by sun, moon, planets, and stars. At the very edge of Libya, where day begins to fade and night thickens across the sands, the weary form of Atlas bent low, his skin rubbed raw where heaven met shoulder, his breath steady beneath the load, his life a line drawn between stars and soil. Even the monstrous once desired to relieve him. One rose up, born of fury, and cried out that the pillars of Olympus should be shattered, that Atlas should drop his burden and take up arms instead, that the circling sky should no longer press him down, that the stars themselves should be hurled like stones in revolt. He promised that Atlas would fear no longer, would not be chained to the sky, that the heavens could be lifted by another, even by the hand of Zeus himself. But Atlas remained, unmoved by promises or threats, for his role had been chosen long ago. His daughters knew his suffering. One, speaking of her father, told how he stood even now by the boundaries of Libya, body groaning, bent beneath the dome of heaven. His pain was not hidden. In songs and tales it echoed. On a night when new unions were formed by a lake sacred to old gods, when celebrations swirled in dance and music. Even then the Titan stirred. The ancient father, bowed low, began to pluck a melody from the sky itself, using the movement of the firmament like a harp, and though his shoulders bore the turning heavens, he spun them as though in dance, singing his own low harmony as if to join the voices far below. But no joy reached him, and even by the waters of Cremetes, where ancient rivers rolled through western lands, Atlas remained bent beneath the heavens that whirled and spun above his frame. Writers of the old world knew this burden. His name became a proverb, a way to speak of great suffering or vast undertakings. To say Atlas the heaven was to name a task too great for mortals. To speak of those who lifted burdens too heavy, who took on the sky and fell silent beneath it. His name meant strength, but also sorrow. His shoulders, iron-bound and unmoving, held both earth and sky, never slipping, never stopping. And even when others passed through his tail, like the hero who came seeking the golden fruit from the garden of the west, it was Atlas who stood at the center. That hero found him still suffering, still bowed, and in that moment a bargain was struck. The heavens passed from the Titan's back to another's, just for a while, as Atlas walked free to retrieve the apples. He crushed the dragon that hissed through the branches and returned with the prize, but the burden was his alone. the sky came back to him, pressed again onto the same raw shoulders, and there it remained. No release followed, no freedom came, only the stars above and the churning dome, and the turning of ages as Atlas stood still beneath the weight of the world. Heracles, during his long and difficult journey to complete the labors set before him, came at last to the task that led him far into the lands where even the stars seemed to lean lower, where the edge of the world whispered through the winds. And there he faced the burden that belonged to another. It was told that Heracles either tricked the great Titan into retaking the sky upon his shoulders after briefly handing it over, or perhaps, in a different telling, raised up the pillars of heaven himself to forever spare the Titan from the crushing weight he had long endured. In one account, the golden apples, treasures of the earth, once gifted to Zeus by Gaia herself on the day of his marriage to Hera, were not found in Libya, as some believed, but were guarded far away among the Hyperboreans, with the Titan who stood beneath the sky. Prometheus, wise and watchful even in his own punishment, had told Heracles not to reach for the apples with his own hand, but to seek out the Titan, who alone could approach the sacred grove and pluck the fruit guarded so fiercely. When Heracles reached the land of the Hyperboreans and found the Titan standing as always beneath the wide heavens, he remembered the advice. Without protest, he stepped beneath the dome and took the sky upon his shoulders, bearing for a time what the Titan had held for ages. The Titan, no longer crushed by the firmament, walked free and entered the garden, and from the sacred trees of the Hesperides, he gathered 3 of the golden apples. When he returned, hands full of the fruit, he looked upon the hero and said he would carry the apples back to the king, and that the hero should remain behind and hold the sky forever in his place. Heracles listened and nodded, pretending to agree, but then, with clever words, he asked if the Titan might take the sky for just a moment longer, so that a cushion might be placed on his head to ease the pressure of the heavenly dome. The Titan, unaware, agreed. He set down the apples and reached once again toward the heavens, lifting them as he had done before, and in that moment, Heracles gathered the apples and walked away, leaving the Titan to his ancient duty once more. Some say that this trick never happened, and that Heracles instead faced the guardian himself, a dragon who watched the trees with sleepless eyes, and slew the beast with his strength alone, reaching into the garden and taking the apples without help. When he returned to the king, he gave the apples as proof of his completed task. The king, who had not expected the feat to succeed, offered them back as a gift, but the divine laws forbade that the apples remain anywhere outside their sacred home, and so the goddess herself took them and returned them to the grove, where they would shine again in secret. In another tale, long after this labor, the Argonauts arrived in that same land and found the garden empty of its guardian, the great serpent born of Libyan soil, having only recently been destroyed. The apples remained in their quiet grove, and the shadow of the Titan still loomed near. His duty never changed. In Olympia, among the great images carved and painted on the screens around the temple of Zeus, one could see the figure of the Titan holding up both heaven and earth, and beside him stood the hero, prepared to take the load. The scene captured that moment of exchange, the heavy silence between burden and relief, with others standing by, figures from legend, each bearing symbols of their own stories. Elsewhere, in other depictions, one could see the chain still holding Prometheus, even as the hero climbed toward him, ready to free him from torment, just as he had once slain the eagle and brought release. The Hesperides too were shown, bearing the apples in their hands, their task of guarding the sacred fruit passed into tale and painting. As generations came and went, on chests carved with myth and memory, the Titan still stood, the hero still reached, and the apple still gleamed in the hands of those who watched. Through it all, the sky remained above, turning slowly, pressing downward, held aloft by the same shoulders year after year without end. Atlas too was shown, just as the stories told, standing with the full weight of both heaven and earth resting on his shoulders, captured in the image as part of the dedication at Olympia by Kypselos. His arms strained under the burden, but still he held it high, and in his hands he also carried the golden apples of the Hesperides, shimmering with the light of the distant garden from which they had been taken. Near him there stood a man with a sword, stepping forward with strength in his stride, his presence unmistakable, even though his name was not carved into the stone. For all who looked could see, it was Heracles, his form known to every eye, even in silence. The inscription spoke only of Atlas holding up the heavens, and mentioned nothing of the hero directly, but the image was clear. He had come to take the apples, and perhaps for a moment, the sky itself. In another part of Olympia, within the third treasury, there were more images, wooden figures carved from cedar, showing again the great dome of the heavens resting on the shoulders of Atlas, and beside him was Heracles, and the tree of the Hesperides bearing the sacred fruit. Around the tree coiled the dragon, its body winding tightly as it kept its endless watch. The figures had been carved by the hand of Theocles, the son of Hegelos, and his son had helped him, leaving their names inscribed upon the heavens they had shaped. Though time passed, and the Hesperides were moved to another temple by the Eleans, their story still remained in the carvings, and the treasury stood as a memory of the distant place and its sacred burden, built by the people of Epidamnos. And in a painting found at Neapolis, the scene lived again in color and motion, showing Atlas and the moment Heracles came to him. This time there was no order from a king, no command from Eurystheus. Heracles had come on his own, claiming that he could bear the sky better than the one who had carried it for ages. He looked upon Atlas and saw the toll of centuries in his body, saw that his limbs were trembling and that his back bowed low under the endless pressure. Atlas was crouched upon one knee, unable to fully stand, his strength nearly gone, and Heracles, watching him with a mixture of sympathy and challenge, said that he could lift the heavens higher, hold them longer, carry them more easily. He did not say it as boast, but as pity, and offered to share the task. The Titan, who had not known relief for an age, eagerly agreed, pleading for the hero to try, hoping for even a moment of freedom. The painting showed Atlas as weary beyond measure, his sweat glistening on his skin, his muscles trembling, his arm barely able to hold steady. Heracles, by contrast, was filled with purpose. His club lay on the ground, abandoned for the task ahead, and his hands reached forward not for battle, but for burden. His face was drawn with desire to help and to prove his strength. In the art, the skill of the painter was seen not in the hero's bright figure, but in the darkened lines and shadows of the Titan himself. The shading traced the parts of Atlas's body, where the effort lived. The hollow of his stomach still visible, though he leaned forward, the panting motion captured in the shape of his chest. The heavens he held were drawn above, filled with swirling stars set into the ether, and the light of those stars flickered across his shoulders, reminding the viewer that what he held was not just weight, but the entire sky. The burden was not stone or iron. It was time, light, stars, wind, and the edge of the world. all resting on one who had carried it since the fall of the old gods. In that moment captured in paint, Heracles stepped forward not to fight, but to carry, and Atlas, bent and broken, opened his arms. Whether or not the hero truly held the sky longer than a moment, whether he succeeded or simply tried, the image remained, of strength offered not in war, but in relief, and of a Titan, tired and strained, finding in that single moment the shape of something that felt like rest. The bull that moves across the sky, known as the bull of the heavens, marks one of the great constellations among the stars, and alongside it are the celestial bears, the kind seen turning through the night in slow, constant circles. Around them, the winds are shaped as living forces, some shown blowing in harmony with one another, facing the same way, while others are locked in opposition, struggling against each other as if their rivalries continue even in the heights above the world. These forces, these lights, these turning bodies of the sky, all of them came to rest for a time upon the shoulders of Heracles, who stepped into the task once borne by another. And though he carried them only for a while, he did so with such strength and steadiness that it was said the heavens fit more firmly upon his back than even upon the Titans. One day, they said, he would rise to the stars not to carry them, but to live among them, seated in joy, drinking in peace, and embraced by the goddess of youth herself. But first he stood beneath the sky and held its weight, proving that no burden was beyond him. He who would one day be taken into the heavens had once held them up, bending his head beneath the stars when the one who had supported them before needed relief. He placed his body between heaven and earth and felt no fear. In the words of poets and philosophers, he swelled with the pride of strength already proven, for by carrying the sky, he learned that nothing was too great. The vast arch of the heavens did not press him down. His shoulders did not sag beneath the mass. The stars rested upon him, and even the goddess who had long watched him with disdain saw him unbent, and the sky, it seemed, stood more firmly because of his strength. The firmament, the whole dome of night, leaned safely upon his back, and he held not only stars and clouds, but all the weight that came with the sky, the cold silence of the upper world, the turning of constellations, and the breath of the wind. It was said again that no weight could crush him, not even the sky itself. He had once carried the royal roof of the universe, and his shoulders remembered its pressure, though it never overcame him. In another tale it was said that when he went to gather the golden apples guarded in the far western lands, he placed great pillars at the ends of the earth. These stood like tall towers, holding up the sky themselves, placed so that the one who had always borne the weight might at last find some measure of rest. These pillars became the markers of where the world ended, rising high and strong, as if the labor of one man had created a new balance between earth and heaven. The one who had carried the sky for ages, the Titan with knowledge of sea and stars, was said to be their guardian, and his release was whispered in old verses, suggesting that even the gods in time granted mercy. As the wind calmed and the ships once again set sail, even the Titans, broken and buried, were allowed to rise again, free from their chains. And so, perhaps even Atlas was released from his burden, though the stars still turned, and the sky still stood. He who once carried it now watched, perhaps, from a distance. But Atlas was more than strength. He was wisdom. He studied not just the weight of the sky, but the meaning of the stars that moved across it. He was said to meditate upon heaven and upon the deep places of the world, not only because he held the sky, but because he knew it. The constellations were not fixed, but living, rising and falling with the seasons. disappearing into the underworld before returning again. He watched these patterns and understood them. And the sea too, he knew, for the stars were used to guide across it, and the paths above were reflected in the waves below. He was not just the bearer of the sky. He was its scholar, its guardian, and its interpreter. In time, others would learn from him. But it was said, by those who remembered, that Atlas had once worked out the science of the heavens. He had measured their motion. He had known the rising and setting of stars, the breath of wind that moved with the moon, and the unseen currents that shaped the edges of the world. His knowledge was silent, his burden endless, and his image eternal. A figure bent beneath the sky, bearing it, knowing it, and shaping the space between heaven and earth. He surpassed all others in the knowledge of astrology, and it was said that he was the first to truly understand the arrangement of the stars, not as scattered lights across a flat sky, but as part of a great sphere, a revolving dome that encircled the world, its patterns set in a divine design. Because of this deep understanding, people came to believe that he was the one holding the entire firmament upon his shoulders, not only in a physical sense, but in the way he carried the wisdom of the heavens in his mind. It was not just strength that defined him, but knowledge, and the shape of the cosmos itself seemed to bend to the discoveries he had made. In a similar way, when Heracles returned to the Greeks and brought with him the teachings of the celestial sphere, he too was praised and honored, as if by bringing the understanding of the heavens, he had taken up the burden once borne by Atlas. In this way, the burden passed not through struggle but through knowledge, and the image of holding the sky came to symbolize the weight of understanding its vastness. Near the ancient land of Tanagra, upon a mountain called Karikios, there was said to be a place known as Polos, where Atlas once sat in deep thought, meditating not only on the heights of heaven, but also on the depths of the underworld. There, as the ancient poet once said, was the one who knew the deep places of the sea, who stood holding or guarding the pillars that separated earth from sky, his thoughts reaching from the bottom of the sea to the top of the heavens. Even in later times, scholars wrote of him not only as one who carried the heavens, but as one who interpreted the sky, giving form to the study of astronomy, and because of this, they said he must bear the heavens still, for to know the stars was to carry them in the mind forever. But Atlas was not alone in his story. He was father to many, and among his children were the daughters who came to be known as the starry nymphs of the night sky. The Pleiades and the Hyades were born from him, and his son, the beautiful youth Hyas, completed this shining family. When Hyas died, he was placed among the stars as Aquarius, the water-bearer, and the lion that slew him was set as Leo, the two constellations rising and setting in opposition in the sky. His sisters, grieving, also became stars, the Pleiades sparkling in the heavens and the Hyades bringing rain with their rising. In one of the oldest epics, the name of Atlas appeared again, as the father of a goddess who lived alone on an island, washed by waves deep in the sea, where she waited and remembered, and the name of her father was still spoken as baleful Atlas, who knew all the oceans and stood apart holding up the world. The poet Hesiod gave the names of the 7 daughters of Atlas, each one linked to wind and light and storm. Lovely Taygete, dark-faced Electra, shining Alcyone, bright Asterope, swift Telaino, gentle Maya, and soft Merope, all born to him and shining in the night, as a trail of stars that moved together across the sky. And in one fragment, it was said that these daughters mourned their father's endless labor, their songs filled with sadness for the one who stood beneath the sky, and in their sorrow They became wingless spirits of the night, not birds, but lights that flickered in the sky like phantoms of stars. Another ancient writer described their birth on the slopes of Arcadian Sicyon, where Atlas had lain with the daughter of Ocean, and from that union came the 7 daughters known as the Pleiades, each one bearing a name remembered in star maps and myths. On the carved throne of Apollo in far Amyclae, scenes were shown of these stories, of Atlas and his daughters, of the weight he bore and the stars they became, of the night sky shaped by myth and memory. Even in art and sculpture, the presence of Atlas was never far from the heavens he once carried. His knowledge had given form to the stars, and his sorrow had placed his children among them, their names now written in light, and his own story told again and again as the one who stood forever at the edge of the world, not only as bearer of the sky, but as father of the stars, near Sparta, carved into the stone reliefs, were the forms of ancient figures remembered by all. Among them were Poseidon and Zeus, carrying the daughters of Atlas, Taygete and Alcyone, lifting them with strength and care, while nearby stood the image of their father himself, the one who held the sky, the one who bore the endless dome upon his shoulders. His daughters were not forgotten, for their beauty and their sorrow reached the heavens, just as his burden did. From the union of Atlas and Pleione came Maia, Calypso, Alcyone, Merope, Electra, and Celaeno, each name known across the stars. In another telling, it was said that Atlas by Pleione, or perhaps by an Oceanid, had 12 daughters in all and 1 son named Hyas. That son, so fair and young, was struck down by a wild boar or perhaps a lion, and his death brought such grief to his sisters that they died from sorrow. Of these daughters, 5 were placed among the stars, finding their home between the horns of the bull, and were named the Hyades after their brother. The rest too passed away from mourning and were set into the night sky as well, and because there were many, they were called the Pleiades, the shining cluster whose name would echo across generations. It was said again that Hyas, son of Atlas and Pleione, died by the tusk or claw of a beast, and his memory was marked not by statues or tombs, but by the weeping stars above. In later poems, the grandson of Atlas was called Atlanteus, for he was born of Maia, daughter of the sky-bearer. He who flew on winged sandals carried the name of Atlas in his blood, passed down through Pleione's line. Another voice told of a woman whose mother, Dione, was sister to the Pleiades, and thus Atlas, who held the circling sky on his shoulders, was her grandfather. Another tale told how Tethys and Ocean, whose waters wrapped the world, had a daughter, Pleione, and she joined with Atlas who lifted the sky, and from them came the Pleiades. Before Atlas ever bore the sky, the boy Hyas had already been born of Ocean's daughter Aethra, and when he hunted in the wild and found the lair of a lioness, he became prey to the beast, and his blood soaked the ground of Libya. His mother wept, and so did his sisters, and even Atlas, the one who would later haul the weight of the world upon his shoulders, wept for his son. The loss marked him forever, and the stars told the story when the seasons changed. The grandson of Atlas flew with speed, swift on wings, and his bloodline traced back to the one who held the sky. Others too bore the name of the Titan. One, such as Electra, the daughter of Atlas, gave birth to Dardanus, founder of Troy, and so the blood of Atlas flowed through kings and heroes. Maia, who bore the winged messenger, was daughter of the same Atlas, who stood beneath the stars, propping them up with his back and shoulders. In another tale, it was said that the mountains themselves once were him. long after his sorrow, long after his burden, when the sky still turned and the stars still moved, a new story rose to explain the shape of the land. It was said that the great bearer of the sky had been turned to stone by the hero who carried the Gorgon's head. In that moment, Atlas became the mountains of North Africa, frozen forever in the pose of one who held the firmament aloft. The ridges of his back became peaks, and his shoulders became ranges, and his name lived on not only in the stars, but in the stones that pierced the sky. Atlas was once described as a mountain in Libya, a towering figure standing at the edge of the world, and in the old song of the dithyrambic poet, he was imagined not as a god or titan, but as a shepherd, living beneath the open skies, tending his flocks in the last lands that touch the western sea. In this version, when Perseus arrived soaring through the air on his winged sandals, seeking rest after long travels, he came upon Atlas and asked to pass through his land. But Atlas, unmoved by words, questioned the stranger and denied him passage. When speech failed to soften him, Perseus showed the head of the Gorgon, and in that instant Atlas was turned to stone. His body stiffened, his limbs hardened, and his towering form became the mountain that would forever bear his name. In another tale, the story unfolded with more vivid details. Perseus, flying over the world, reached the coast of the Atlantic Sea as evening approached and dared not travel further into night. He descended to the land of Atlas, seeking shelter. This was no ordinary land. Here ruled a giant like no other, a son of Iapetos, whose body was greater than any man's, whose reach stretched across the world's last realms, and whose lands touched the tired wheels of the sun's chariot as it ended its daily journey. His fields teemed with 1,000 herds and 1,000 flocks, left to roam free with no fences, no fear, and no neighbors to dispute his claim. His trees were heavy with golden leaves and golden apples hanging from golden branches. To him, Perseus spoke gently, naming his descent from Zeus and offering his deeds as proof of worth. But Atlas remembered the ancient words of the oracle, the prophecy from Themis, who had once warned him that a son of Zeus would one day steal the golden fruit from his tree. That warning had shaped his life. In fear of the prophecy, he built high walls around the orchard, raised massive barriers of stone, and placed a monstrous dragon as guardian over the trees. No traveler was welcome, and all were driven away. When Perseus approached, the giant shouted at him to leave, denying his claims and calling his bloodline lies. He raised his strength to push him back, towering over him in defiance. But even Perseus, brave as he was, could not match such strength in battle. And so, seeing no other choice, he withdrew slightly, reached to his side, and brought forth the dreadful head. He held it out and turned away his eyes. And when Atlas saw the face of Medusa, his transformation began. His beard and hair thickened into forests, his shoulders became cliffs, his arms stretched into long ridges, and the spot where his head had been rose into a towering summit. His bones hardened into stone, and his body, already vast, grew even larger. Every part of him expanded, as the will of the gods turned his punishment into permanence. The whole vault of heaven, with all its endless stars, came to rest upon his back. And so he became the mountain, the foundation of the sky, frozen in time. In the tale's deeper layers, the mountain was not only a body turned to stone, but a truth made visible. And from that day forward, the peak bore the name of Atlas, standing high in the lands of the West, holding up the stars, a monument to pride, prophecy, and divine power. The story told by those who tried to explain the old myths in a more grounded way spoke of two brothers who lived in the land known as Hesperides, a place far in the west where the sun was said to set, and the land gleamed with golden light. These brothers were known for their fame and wisdom, and their names were Hesperos and Atlas. They lived peacefully in this distant country and were renowned for their flocks, which were more beautiful than any others in the world. These sheep were covered in golden yellow wool, so bright and pure that the poets who wrote of them called them golden mela, which meant golden sheep. It was from this detail that many later stories arose, shaped by imagination and transformed into myth. Hesperos had a daughter named Hesperis, and he gave her in marriage to his brother. The land they ruled came to be called Hesperides in honor of her name, and through her, Atlas became the father of 7 daughters. These daughters were known both as the Atlantides in memory of their father and as the Hesperides, to reflect the name of their mother and their homeland. Their beauty was beyond compare, and they lived with dignity and grace, known for their virtue and modesty. But their fame spread far, and it reached the ears of a powerful king in a distant land, one whose name was feared by many. This king, ruling over the land of Egypt, was seized by desire for the daughters of Atlas and devised a cruel plan to possess them. He sent pirates by sea, instructing them to capture the maidens and bring them back to him. The pirates found the girls while they were at play in a peaceful garden, unaware of danger. They were seized and carried away quickly, placed upon ships, and taken across the water, their cries fading into the waves. But fate would not let their sorrow last long. The hero, known for his strength and deeds, came upon the pirates as they were sitting on a distant shore, enjoying their stolen meal. He heard the story from the mouths of the daughters themselves, and without hesitation, he struck. The pirates, who had thought themselves safe, were all slain where they sat, and the maidens were brought back to their father unharmed. Atlas, overwhelmed with gratitude, welcomed the hero not only as a savior, but as a friend. To repay the kindness shown to his daughters, Atlas offered more than thanks. He gave his help freely in whatever labor the hero faced, and opened his mind to share the knowledge he had gathered over many years. Atlas had studied the heavens not with superstition but with careful thought. He had understood the movement of the stars, and through quiet reflection, he had discovered that they followed a spherical path. He had grasped the shape of the sky, had studied the constellations, and had built a vision of the universe that surpassed anything known before. This was why, over time, people began to say that Atlas held the sky on his shoulders, not because he physically lifted it, but because he had carried the knowledge of its form within his mind. And so, when the hero brought this wisdom back to the Greeks, teaching them the same truth about the shape of the cosmos, the people honored him as though he too had carried the heavens. In their symbolic language, they said he had taken over the burden that once belonged to Atlas. Through this way of speaking, the truth behind the myth was revealed, not as weight upon the back, but as wisdom passed from one to another, knowledge that shaped the world's understanding of the sky and the stars above.